I was thinking that if one of the big challenges is that sex is taboo, sex is dirty, God's not interested in sex, the flip side of it is the healthy message to say that God is deeply interested and involved in your sexuality. One of the
Yep.
ways I've said it at our events is there is nothing you have ever thought, done, or said about sexuality that comes as a surprise to God. Because as the author of it, he's, I think, deeply aware of all the ways it could be mismanaged. And rather than looking to zing us with, his lightning if we step aside, I think for him it's more the grief of, I've created you for good and for a good thing. And when it's being misused, I know where it leads and the pain it can cause. And I want to help and be involved. And so if we saw God as a helper, how often is Jesus described the Holy Spirit in our life as a helper, and
Yes.
applied that to our sexuality, what a difference that would make versus I think most of us have carried a framework of God as judge, God as critic, God as, whatever the metaphor is, instead to say, man, God cares deeply about my sexuality. He created it. He's
Yeah.
aware of it. He knows, and he wants to help, not shame. And then with that message, I think, is to say to people in all different seasons of life, you are not alone. If you're struggling with pornography, you're not alone. If you're struggling with healthy sexuality within your marriage, you're not alone. If you're working through issues of health and erectile dysfunction in middle age and later in life, you're not alone. Because anything to do with sexuality, I think the
Right.
enemy's message is just, boy, you're
Right.
probably the only person dealing with this, and it's probably something
Right.
you did wrong. And if other people knew, they'd be horrified or repulsed or
Right.
angry. Just figure it out yourself. And it shows up in research that would suggest people feel more comfortable talking to their doctor about sexual issues than to their pastor, and by far. Now, I get that the doctor on the medical physical side may have more training and awareness, but it says something to me that the safe place people find is a doctor. And you think about the sterile environment a doctor's office is, where you're often sitting there and you've been asked to undress to a level of appropriateness so the doctor can check you out. And that's the place we feel more comfortable bringing up hard questions. That says something to me about what's going on in our churches, because I just think that should be the safest place. Now, there's an appropriate time and place to ask hard questions, but I think that's the positive message a church can bring out, is to say you're not alone. These questions are not unique. The things you're facing are not
Yeah.
unordinary. And God is deeply involved and cares about what you're going through. And then the last one I'll bring up in terms of a positive message, and I've heard you talk about it, Rodney, so maybe you want to riff on it a little bit, but that idea that not every sexual thought or desire is evil. And I think I really felt that way, especially as a teenager. It's like, man, any desire is of my flesh. And it actually, quite honestly, taught me to fear desire as something being
Right.
very fleshly and sinful, when the
Yeah.
truth is God's the author of desire. God is the
Right.
author of sex and sexual desire.
Yes.
And yes, absolutely, there's ways that it can quickly be used in ways to take us away from God. But
Sure.
at its heart, at its core, I think we need people to hear, and they need to hear it a lot, that sexual desire is God-given, and your capacity for
Yes.
desire is from God. And even your desire, and I know people don't like to think of it this way because we typically refer to lust in a sinful manner, but I've tried to explain to people, I think we need to embrace that my capacity for lust is actually God-given. Because if we break it down to a definition and think that lust is my ability to have a strong sexual desire for another person, well, I hope to God that when any one of us meets and is dating and engaged to our future spouse, that at some point in there is strong sexual desire for that person,
Right.
even
Right.
though we're not yet married. And would we look at that and say, well, all that is evil and wrong? I mean, I know I felt that way, but there, I think, is a right element of that says, well, actually, that's what God made me for, so that one day when I
Absolutely.
started to be of the right age, I would be interested in marriage and connection. Because the flip side is, and God did this in the animal kingdom, sexual reproduction is not about desire. It's just about, it's chemistry, it's physicality, it's the animal kingdom of like, we just reproduce so that life goes on. And God could have made sex to be just a very kind of non-emotional, non-desire kind of thing, but he didn't. He really
Right.
rooted it in this kind of inner part of us that desires
Yeah.
to be known and to be with another person. And so is all of that lust in the sense of sin, or is some of that the capacity for which God made me? And I can even hear for some listeners, like I'm going into that, they're getting nervous, like, oh man, that doesn't seem right. And again, I get that very quickly it can go towards unhealthy things. But if at the core we say sex is good and it's from God, my desires are good, and at the core, they're from God. How do I, going
Right.
back to your words, how do I learn to understand, manage desire from a sense that is respectful,
Yeah.
that is good, is honoring? That would, I just think, change the conversation for a lot of people.